first of all, welcome. It's amazing to have you over here. And you're a very inspiring person in the open source community to a lot of us. And what makes it even better is that the things you built are like used by millions of developers all across the world, right? Which is really cool. And that's including me. Like I use Starship on all my shells, on PowerShell, CMD, like literally everything that's there. Uh, but yeah, I mean, like I just want to say that it's a great honor to have you on, and we really appreciate you joining this chat with us.
Absolutely, it's super flattering, and it's a joy to be here. Yeah, I mean, like at the end of the day, I just made this out of necessity, out of a thing that I wanted for myself, and it just so happened to kind of strike a chord with people. So yeah, it's always super humbling to just see how far Starship and other projects have kind of grown with time. Cool stuff.
Absolutely. And I mean, I guess the first question in mind, like, how do you start your journey, right? Like, where did you start, and what got you interested in software development?
Yeah. So for me, it was a bit of a winding road. I've always kind of been interested in programming computers and stuff. I had my first computer when I was like 3 or 4. It was a good old Windows 3.1 and DOS. It was an old clunker, but I was able to play Pac-Man on it, so I was happy. Uh, and from then, I started. I learned a bit of scripting through high school and stuff. But nothing serious. Over the course of like math class, I'd be spending my time instead of studying, just writing programs that would answer exam questions for me, like plugging in the I don't know what were they the different formulas you'd need. I'd be like making scripts in my graphing calculator to kind of answer those questions for me. So I don't know if it's the right way to do math class, but I came out a better programmer for it. Um, After high school, I went on to study. Well, I thought to myself, I don't want to sit in front of a computer all day and just type code. That sounds boring, and uh, I won't like it over time. I was dead wrong. I went into electrical engineering because I thought it was like programming adjacent. Turns out it's like 50% programming and 50% like hard physics. And I would ace the programming parts of it. Like they're called sequential circuits. So you're making basically programs with circuitry. And the other 50%, I'd like just absolutely get devastated. I would bomb those tests. So I dropped out of school and went on to do game testing, which was so much fun. It's really just playing games all day. But it was a lot of monotony. It was a lot of like playing the same level every day. And I was doing like performance testing of games. So I'd be like checking frame rates of the level to make sure that like daily patches of the game didn't break. The game I was testing at the time was like League of Legends. So I loved the game, but I got really sick of it by the end of testing it. So what I would do is I learned a little bit of auto hotkey, automated the process of testing the games, and then would spend my time during work learning to program. So the computer would be doing its own thing. I'd be learning more automation, more programming. And from then I went on to like kind of kick off my career in programming with this newfound skill that I got by not doing work. I don't know if it was the ethical thing to do, but I came out of it, I think, better off. From then, I went on to do web development after doing like web automation and web testing. And web development transitioned into like kind of what I'm doing now. So I worked at Shutterstock and Autodesk as a web developer, and Auth0, and most recently now CodeSandbox. So that's kind of been my progression. And over that time, like I had side projects that kind of leveled up my programming ability. So in my free time, my friend and I, my friend Josh Starr, and I built a platform for tracking what anime is coming out. It's called AniChart. And then we went on to make AniList, which is a kind of like a social cataloging site, social network for anime fans. And that's growing tremendously. That's got now like 1.5 million users. And
Wow.
and also went on to build Starship in my free time. We can, I guess, dig a little deeper into Starship specifically, because that's got a cool story, I guess.
I mean, absolutely. And I think something that's really fascinating is the fact that like he also like used automation, right? So something like that I can actually relate to you is that like early in my journey as well, I was writing this software that basically installs packages like for example, it could install browsers, it could install all sorts of stuff, right? Um, and like there came a time where I actually needed to like kind of learn how to automate updating each package. So I actually found like I mean I also saw like auto hotkey and stuff, but I think like what you did with automation was really cool. Like I don't think that was something wrong to do. I think that was that was actually pretty smart to do. um so yeah, and like I mean I've also spent a lot of time automating stuff. I find it pretty fascinating actually. um like how you can automate something that's kind of seemingly impossible to actually automate, right? It's really cool. And yeah, I mean we can really go into Starship, and we'd also be very interested in like kind of hearing your journey after like dropping out, right? It's not something that everyone does, and it's pretty interesting, so we would love to know more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I could talk a bit about like how Starship came to be. So when I was learning about like the terminal and command line and stuff, I saw all these like cool different shells that people were using. So the popular one was Z Shell. Everyone was saying like to upgrade your terminal experience, install Z Shell, um, and and the one that came installed with Mac OS is like Bash, and I had played with PowerShell on Windows. Um, but the one that I fell in love with is Fish, and I still use it to this day. I found Fish. It's got some quirks that make it a little different from the other conventional shells. If you come from like Z Shell or Bash, it has so many more conveniences in that you get like tab completion and syntax highlighting and like things that usually you'd have to install like a dozen plugins to make it feel like that. On the flip side, it's got its own kind of unique syntax. Though more and more with every update, like the most recent update, they kind of like introduced the same syntax as Z Shell, which has been a frustration. People would like try to run Z Shell scripts in Fish or Bash scripts in Fish, and it wouldn't work. But now it kind of generally does, so that's less of an issue. But once you get over that syntax hurdle, it's a beautiful shell. So I was looking to kind of make my shell look cool and feel good in a way that you could very easily on Z Shell. Notably, there was an existing prompt called Spaceship ZSH. You can see where maybe Starship's inspiration came from. I would use Spaceship on my ZSH installation, but there was nothing like it for Fish. So I went on to kind of port it over to Fish. I made Space Fish. All these names get confusing, but Space Fish was my first like open source project that kind of garnered some interest. It got, we'd have a few hundred people installing it every week. It started amassing a few contributors that were like regular contributors, and that was a lot of fun. But the real hurdle was every time, like it was a one-to-one port. I would read a line of ZSH and kind of translate it to the Fish equivalent, which means that we also got all of their bugs with it. We got like all the things that could be improved, performance hiccups, that all came with it. So I'd spend my time making a fix for the shell port and then backporting it to the ZSH port, making pull requests to Spaceship. And that was good, but it became a little untenable. I wanted to build new features. I wanted to make PRs to ZSH to contribute new things. But I'd always have to port it over to Fish. It's like a lot of back and forth. It'd be frustrating. So there was some previous work done with like introducing the concept of a shell agnostic prompt. The maintainer of Spaceship actually made it, Dennis Davin. He made a proof of concept in Node for what a cross-shell prompt would be like. And it was super enlightening. It had a lot of good ideas for how you can use like the same binary, the same executable to produce a prompt for any shell. But there were a lot of drawbacks with it being in Node. Node is an interpreted language, so it takes a lot of time to spin up. The cold start time is very long. The amount of time it would take to go from 0 to like showing just a very basic prompt, like just the directory, could take 100 milliseconds because Node has to interpret the entire JavaScript file and then execute it. It doesn't do any work ahead of time because it doesn't know what's in the file yet.
Yeah, exactly. And like in
Mhm.
addition to that, I've kind of seen that the startup times change a lot, like kind of depending on the system. So
Mhm.
and I've also like experienced the same issues with Python, right? It takes a lot of time to actually start up, and these times like they can go for like anywhere from like 0.1 seconds to 2-3 seconds, and like yeah, I mean like
Mhm.
that's something that's not very acceptable for a shell, right? Because you just want to get in and you want to go.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So you can feel it. I tried using the Node proof of concept, and you could feel it was doing something different from other prompts. It took time. Like you could feel the moment between hitting enter and then the next cursor appearing. So we were chatting about it. He was impressed by the work we were doing on Spacefish. I was impressed by the work he was doing on ZSH, and I thought, man, it'd be so cool if we could just collaborate on one unified code base and build these features together. He's like, oh well, it didn't really work in Node. If we had somebody who knew like C or Rust or something, and I kind of heard that, my ears perked up. I remember reading at the time that on Stack Overflow's like annual survey, for the fourth year in a row at that time, Rust was the most loved programming language. And I was always curious, like, what makes a programming language so loved? Like, I'm passionate about JavaScript, but I wouldn't say it's without its flaws. What makes Rust so different? So it was kind of just, I wanted to just test myself and see, like, learn a bit of systems programming, because it's a whole new paradigm from like web development or Node or JavaScript. Um, and two, kind of like see, yeah, what would like how much more performant would it be? And after 2-3 months, the Rust learning curve is steep. It is so hard to learn. It's like taking everything you know about programming and throwing it out the window. Very little of it kind of translates in.
I can actually completely relate because when I tried to pick up Rust, it
Mhm.
took me like 3 times to actually like kind of force myself into writing that code, right? Because the memory management, it tends to be pretty overwhelming, right? And like when you first look at it, the hello world is like so easy. Oh man, I'm gonna pick this up in a couple of seconds, and you go ahead
Yeah,
to memory management, stack and heap, and like and at that point you're like, wait, like what's going on?
yeah. These are things that you usually just don't have to think about at all.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's so difficult. It can't be understated just how much of a learning curve it is. But once you get over that, oh my goodness, you feel like your ability to program has like 10x'd overnight. You're able to spot bugs in other languages like that. You're able to kind of get a sense for what is unsafe code, where your memory is going. So I mean, this is a whole other thing, but I think that Rust is like well worth learning, even though it's difficult. I think it makes you a much better programmer overall. Um, but yeah, after making like a proof of concept, after trying out, I saw like the node proof of concept would take maybe 100, 120 milliseconds to render. The ZSH original and the fish one would take maybe 40 to 60 milliseconds. The Rust one, it took 2-3 milliseconds. It was absurd. And this was without putting like any effort into performance. It just happened. It's just the magic of Rust. It's the magic of having like a precompiled binary. My goodness. So from then, I knew this was something. I knew I was hitting gold because no one else was doing this. No one else was making a shell prompt in a systems programming language, and it made so much sense for the use case. So from then, I put a lot of my time and effort into kind of giving it the opportunity and room to grow. What that means in open source is writing, beautiful tests, writing tests that give you a lot of confidence, writing documentation that makes it easy for people to get onboarded and to contribute. Usually, this is like an afterthought. You're trying to get to something that has all the features you want, but I knew that much more valuable than that would be to have a lot of maintainers early on contribute and add those features with me. So yeah, it was starting from like those basic principles of having good tests, good docs, and inviting good contributors. And from then it kind of exploded, right? It kind of grew tremendously, and is now like among Rust's 10 most starred projects. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's so cool, right? And I mean, I think kind of another reason why Rust is so loved is because like the creators of the language and like the team, like you can see that they're trying to make it as easy as possible for you to understand errors. And I mean, heck, like
Mhm.
they literally give you a tool that's gonna, like, if you just do cargo clippy fix, like it'll just fix everything for you, right? It's I found that pretty cool, right? Because it's not regularly that languages first of all give you like nice pretty errors that you can understand. They have put in a lot of effort to make these like to make it as easy as possible to understand the errors. And I feel like it's just so much more reliable, right? Like you will naturally not like interpreted languages because you only see the errors during runtime, right? But like you should be seeing errors during compile time, like that should be what's happening. So I feel like that's something that's really cool that kind of Rust brings to the table. And I can also like kind of relate with you on the like the 2 millisecond thing, right? For context, again, I was like kind of telling you about that tool that I was writing to actually install libraries and software on Windows PCs, right? Um, and when I actually, so I thought that Python was pretty fast, and initially actually it was pretty fine, right? Like if you have maybe 2 3 imports, everything's good. Once you start getting into like 20 30 imports, complicated file structure, like these startup times will skyrocket. And that's kind of when I realized, like, what have I done? Why have I written this in Python, right? So,
Yeah.
um, and then like I just went to Rust, right? And the first thing I actually asked in the Rust server is like, uh, do imports take time? And and I got a straight up no. And that was like, holy shit. So you can import whatever you want, and it doesn't really add to your startup time unless like these libraries are actually running some code on startup. But I feel like that's super cool. I feel like kind of this whole free imports, really really good developer tooling, and a really satisfying experience. Like I've seen the Rust IDE support is one of the best on the like it's probably the best in the world. Like nothing actually comes even close to it, right? So I mean I think that's something really cool, right? Which is that people have been putting in a lot of effort into the actual ecosystem and the tooling. And I think that's also something that I mean I think that's one of the biggest reasons why Rust is the most loved language in the world. So I think that's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Rust does a really cool job, like a really good job of democratizing systems programming. Until now, systems programming has been really just for people who are willing to, you know, take who are willing to I guess take the pain of working with C, right? If you're not willing to make that sacrifice, you just need to deal with higher level languages. But Rust makes it more approachable, uses more modern language fundamentals, built-in linting, built-in formatting, built-in like it's like a very complete package. Built-in benchmarking and built-in test runner. Like these are things that only modern languages have been introducing, and it's so cool seeing kind of a competitor to C in the space that is confidence inspiring in a way that C could never be because of memory management, while also giving the conveniences and ergonomics of a modern language. It's really an incredible language.
Exactly. And I think like the thing that actually completed the package for me was the crates registry, right? Like it has a massive ecosystem. And um like when you look at C, it's pretty hard to actually like import other packages, and it's a painful process, right? With Cargo, it's so easy, right? Like you can just use someone else's code. It was like the perfect package, right? Because you have something that's incredibly fast, zero cost for imports, really really good developer support, really good ecosystem, really good community, and you also have like all these massive libraries that are very well maintained. That you can
Mm-hmm.
just like kind of it's almost like you just drag and drop it into your code, right? Um, I feel like that's something that kind of really completed the package for me, and I mean I'm sure that that's also one pretty big reason why Rust is growing so quickly, right? Because at the end of the day, people don't want to spend time writing code that's like from scratch, right? Like you don't want to be reinventing the wheel. So I feel like that's
Yeah,
kind of something that's been a big driving factor. And yeah,
yeah. I think you're spot on. The ecosystem's a little young. We're still trying to figure out a few things that more mature languages have figured out. Like in the JavaScript ecosystem, we've kind of unified on Jest. There's always like Vitest and Mocha and like other testing tools, but we've for the most part unified. Same thing for like servers, right? Like Express kind of won the battle. There are other like options, but you can make a confident assumption that if you reach for those tools, it'll have paved road, right? People will have written docs and tutorials on how to use these tools effectively and how to build like scalable services with it. Rust, like we're not quite there yet. There are like 4 or 5 big players in the Rust like server framework world,
yeah,
and they're all kind of equally valid options. And
yeah.
none of them have a tremendous amount more guides or tutorials around them. Um, Hopefully, with time, we'll kind of zero in on something that the community likes and gets the backing of like a lot of people, the majority of people.
Absolutely. 100%. And could you tell us like a bit more on how Starship kind of really grew, right? Because something that I've actually noticed is that kind of with open source, if you want to be like being successful is not only about writing good code, right? Like writing code could be one part. You also need to like know how to position your product or kind of show it off, right? How did you
Mm-hmm.
do that for Starship, right? Because I mean, what I've kind of noticed is that if you like, so I spent 9 months on a tool, right? And at the end of the day, I had to like advertise it extensively, and I maybe got it to like 200 stars. But how did you? So what did you do to kind of propel the growth in the community for Starship?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think marketing is tremendously underrated in open source. People kind of assume that you make a thing and it's going to end up in people's hands, kind of like I don't know, YouTube and Instagram have like algorithms that kind of push new content to people. And
Yeah.
that's not to say you don't need to market that content, but GitHub doesn't really have that, or not nearly as much. There's now the Explorer page, but at the time there wasn't one. Marketing is so tremendously important if you want your project to have any staying power. Um,
Absolutely.
so the first thing that I think is underrated is a good, detailed, like attractive README. It should be kind of like a landing page to a website, to like a marketing page to your business. If the README isn't able to attract a person, then nothing will. They're not going to end up on your documentation site if they skip past your README. So I took a fair bit of time to kind of like craft it into what it is today. It's had a lot of iterations, but it has a lot of strong selling points, like a marketing page. It has like I think some strong copy that makes it interesting at least. And all you need is that bit of interest for people to be like, yeah, I'll run 2 commands and try it out on my machine. If the barrier to entry is low, then you'll at least get people to try. Um, and once you get enough people to try, then a lot of it is word of mouth. So a strong README is so important. And number two, I hate to say it, but a bit of luck. Like Starship was in the right place at the right time, where it used Rust, which was a very attractive, trendy language at the time, which already made it interesting. Like positioning it as it's kind of like Spaceship, but written in Rust. Spaceship, but faster. Like people knew Spaceship. It had like 10,000 stars at the time. It was fairly popular.
Mhm.
Um, and the thing that it kind of developed into, it's no longer just Spaceship, right? It's grown from being an opinionated prompt to kind of a prompt framework. People can use it to customize richly, and I can talk a bit about how we've expanded from like the vision of Spaceship. But as for the marketing front, yeah, like having a good README, good tests, and good docs to attract good contributors. And the rest is history. We added Starship to the readmes of Spacefish and Spaceship at the time as projects inspired by. Um, Spacefish has a banner at the top saying like we're moving over to this one, and that already just brought upon like a bunch of enthusiastic users that were keeping an eye on our README. Yeah, so it's a combination of things, but what's tremendously underrated is like a good strong README. I went on Fiverr, paid someone to make us a logo, and I think that already is like 20% better than most projects on GitHub. Having a good logo, strong branding, making it recognizable, it goes a long distance.
Absolutely. And I think like you're completely like spot on about kind of this assumed discovery not being there for open source, right? It's a because I mean to be honest, this is actually quite common for most early open source like most early open source developers, right? Me included. Because when I started again, like this tool that I was building for installing packages. I kind of made the assumption that hey, I'm going to take the battle to Chocolatey, which is the competitor in the Windows space, right? I'm going to take the battle to them. My product is better, and I'm giving away things for free. And I was like, and in my mind, it was like how could people not want this, right? And what I actually realized was that for the few people who are actually using my tool, they were really happy. Uh, but for those, but there was just a massive audience that basically weren't even like this wasn't being put in front of their eyes, so they have absolutely no clue how to try this out, right? And I think that's something that I was like, I think that's actually something I've noticed with a lot of builders over here, even at Builder Group, right? There's people who just assume, oh, hey, it's open source. That means that it's very easy to discover. Granted that it is easier to discover than like closed source, but really like a really important thing I'm actually seeing is that like you need to post this in Reddit, you need to post this on Product Hunt, a few different places, right? Because you need people to see it, and then it'll kind of spread out through Product Hunt, right? Or like through word of mouth, right? So I think that's something that's absolutely true, which is that like kind of building a successful open source project is a combination of like maybe having a really good product as well as having like a good marketing skills as well as kind of putting effort into aspects that's not only the code. I think that's absolutely true. And I would love to know a bit more about kind of how you started learning Rust, like because like one question I see from everyone over here is that, hey, like do I need to read the whole book? Because like do I need to learn all the traits and generics and all these things, or do I just like jump in, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. My personal journey was reading through the books. That took a long time. That took me a good like 2 months of sessions every other night, because I was really pouring through it. I was going through like word by word and trying to really internalize what it meant. And honestly, like the last quarter of it, it went way over my head. But even still, I came out of it super excited about like just starting to write Rust. And I just made Starship from there, right? And that's where I learned like the other 80% of Rust is just writing Rust. It's like any good language. It's like any good skill. You won't get it without practice. Even if you read the book, you're not internalizing it. You're just, going over the words.
Really?
And it doesn't like to this day. I think this is a huge testament to Rust. Starship's never been rewritten, right? The code that's there is still like the first Rust code I've ever written. Starship was the first thing I wrote in Rust, and the fact that it's able to keep up, oh my goodness! Like most other languages, they'd buckle over that because you're not writing it the right way. You're not writing it the idiomatic way. You're not writing it the performant way. But Rust, Clippy will fix it for you. And over time, I found the spots where I'm like kind of cringing at my own code from a year ago, and fix that up. But the basis is still there. The architecture is still that of the first Rust project I've written. There's a lot I'd like to fix. There's a proof of concept for like a re-architecture for Starship that I've written up and that we're discussing within the team. But the best way to learn a language, any language, is really just to get in there, and get frustrated and spend hours on dumb bugs that you'll get over eventually.
Yeah, just add a and like an ampersand here, or like a dereference, like a dereference here, and yeah, you're or a clone, right? Like clone's my favorite. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I mean that's actually that's pretty relatable. I went like about the whole process by so I mean and I'm kind of like I'm actively building this project. It's called Volt. Um, it's supposed to be a JavaScript package manager like written in Rust, right? And how I actually got into this is like was that I actually just I read the first 3 4 chapters. I gave up on the memory management bit, and I just like jumped right into Rust, like just jumped right into the project. So and from then it was just a bunch of spamming random characters to make sure that the code works. And now I have like kind of some clue of what I'm doing. So um, yeah, I mean, I feel like I've also kind of learned by building. I feel like that's actually the case for a lot of people in the community, like which is that they're really new, like they just want to get into it. They're impatient. I feel like kind of that's one way, and I feel like something that's actually kept me in Rust is that although like with bigger projects you have longer compile times and stuff like that, and you do get unproductive. I feel like kind of the Rust community at the end is always there to kind of back you and encourage you, right? Like because every single like Reddit post I've posted on the Rust community, like it's gained a lot of views. Like people really do encourage you with your projects, right? And you do get that respect back and the support from the whole community. So I think that's something that's really cool that I've actually noticed, and I think it's one of the best communities for all like of all the languages out there.
Oh yeah, I think you're spot on. It's such a welcoming, inclusive community. They do a great job of kind of like everyone in it understands just how difficult Rust is, how hard it is to maintain that motivation and to get into it. So everyone does like makes a conscious effort to kind of keep it welcoming and to make it approachable, as unapproachable as Rust might be.
Absolutely. And I think kind of moving on, right? So, what are you working on at CodeSandbox, right? Because obviously it's already a very well known tool, right? I mean, I see people using it every day. Literally everyone knows about it, right? So, could you tell me a bit more on kind of what you're working on at CodeSandbox, right? And like, are you the person who is like, so are you like, did you build it or are you contributing to it? And like, how does that work?
Yeah, yeah. So CodeSandbox is the brainchild of Evis and Bas, two guys from the Netherlands who kind of made it in their free time while they were in university. It has since gotten like VC backing, a Series A. I joined after the Series A, and I've been working on CodeSandbox for over a year now. CodeSandbox, what we're building right now is very different from how people use it today. So today, CodeSandbox is a browser-based web development editor that runs entirely in your browser. So not a lot of people know this, but like you're basically running like node servers and like the package manager and everything. It's all running in your browser using just all these like fundamental elements of Node were ported into a browser compatible version. So what we're doing at CodeSandbox is, and what we've recently announced is CodeSandbox projects, which is kind of like the next step. And the idea is that it's a cloud-based, it's a cloud developer environment. So you are able to connect to an online editor that gives you access to a developer environment. That way, you don't need like a powerful machine to start working. You can start working on your iPad, on your phone, on like a dinky Chromebook, and have all the meat and potatoes of like a real strong, powerful server. And what we do is we also give you a few other benefits. The big selling points are that like it's built for collaboration. We're building CodeSandbox in CodeSandbox right now. So every branch in your repo is a separate running environment and is a live running preview website. So we can have like a developer and a designer in the same environment. You can watch each other developing or collaborating on the same code, and see a live preview. And what's awesome is that you can also use it with how we envision it is any editor. Right now, we created a VS Code extension, so you could use your local tools, your local themes, your local extensions, connect to CodeSandbox, and pick up where you left off on your iPad. We also have a native iPad app, a native iOS app. So it's kind of like a whole suite. Teams are kind of picking it up and using it today to collaborate, to quickly kick off like development tasks and hand each other like running production links of previews. You can think of it as like Netlify deploy previews, but with every key press, you get a new preview. It's not just like every time you push and create a PR. Yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
I think that's really cool, right? And like something we've actually seen that's really growing and that's like super important today is collaboration and like real time technologies, right? So I think that's actually really cool, and I'm looking forward to using it.
Yeah, yeah. What I've been mostly working on is the actually the real time elements of it. I've kind of been deep diving into the world of real time collaborative technology, but it's such a cool bleeding edge kind of area, making offline first collaborative apps and apps that are able to resolve conflict, even though people might have like slow internet, high ping, whatever the case may be. And yeah, it's a fascinating space. So that's kind of been my specialization at CodeSandbox.
Yeah, that's actually that's super cool, right? And I mean, are you using Rust or like what? Like, are you using Elixir? Like, what technologies are you using for the real time stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. So to date, CodeSandbox has been running on Elixir. That's a good guess for the real time features. We have started introducing a little Rust here and there, but the truth is most of it's written in like plain old TypeScript. And the conveniences that come with that is that we can have like our servers that are written in elements of our server that are in Node can share a lot of like the types and protocols, strongly typed protocols as our client and our various clients. So there's a lot of code sharing happening. We haven't seen any like real performance deficiencies from that, but yet. But the team is very interested in Rust, and a lot of us have. Well, a lot of the remaining the rest of the team has been ramping up on Rust, so that we can all kind of pick it up in Rust if need be, or build new services in Rust.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think so. Like, what are your thoughts on kind of open source, right? So obviously, building an open source has been a big aspect of kind of all the work you've been doing, right? So, kind of interested in knowing your thoughts on building an open source versus like closed source, and kind of like how building an open source, like, what are the pros and cons? Like, what do you think is like, what's your opinion on kind of the open source ecosystem today? And yeah, I would love to know that.
Yeah, that's a tough one. My feelings on open source have like definitely changed over time. Um, I love open source, and I'm very glad Starship is open source and CodeSandbox is open source, and it's super fulfilling seeing so many people get value from the work that you do and be able to contribute to it. Something like Starship wouldn't be possible if it wasn't open source because we have plugins for like Swift and Elixir and like .NET, all the languages. We have modules for all of those, and I don't know a thing about like most of these languages, right? One of the purposes of making really good contributor docs and really good tests is so that I can have people who know more about like these languages and Ruby and whatever, like introduce their own language support into Starship. Um, so a project like that makes total sense. Uh, on the flip side, it's also like a ton of developer hours that go into it, and developer hours are valuable and costly. And the time I'm spending building projects like Starship is time I could spend building like a profitable startup, right? So it and so I don't know. I think that there's a good place for open source, but I think that open source support needs work. We need to find a way to incentivize developers to continue keeping things open source and to pay them equitably. Because at the end of the day, open source, for better or worse, is a sacrifice, right? It's opportunity cost.
Absolutely.
And
I mean,
yeah,
I
so
couldn't agree with you more on that, right? Like I've personally seen a lot of people building some really cool things. And they like they're just left in the dark, right? Like there's people just working on some really, really cool things. There's people working on some amazing technologies, and they put in a lot of work, like 2 years, 3 years of work. And at the end, like there's zero users. There's and that's because people like they're not sure how to launch this, right? Like they don't
mhm.
know how they can and like that's one aspect, right? And then kind of the commercial aspect, right? People struggle to make money off it because and I mean this is a growing thing, right? Commercial open source, and I totally support it, right? Because like your code could be open source, but you're still charging for like cloud hosting and things like that, right? I feel like kind of the biggest thing today is that developers are like basically spending millions of hours, right, without any reward. And I feel like that's an issue since like on one side there's people saying that, oh hey, I'll pay you like $100 per hour if you like if you like join my startup, right? And then on the other side there's like people spending hours and hours, like 90 plus hours a week on building open source, and at the end of the day like they literally like they don't get the recognition and the rewards they deserve, right? So I think I mean
Mhm.
like you that's absolutely true, like and I really do share those thoughts with you. And I mean I feel like kind of this aspect of the ecosystem really needs to be sorted out, right? Because people and like especially if you think about contributions, right? Contributions can like they can't always just be some sort of donation, right? Because if tomorrow your software, if it kind of goes commercial or something, right? I mean what happens to all the contributors who are backing it, right? So I feel like that's completely true. I could not agree with you more, right? And I've kind of seen this,
Mhm.
and it's been a hot topic today, right? Which is that how developers going to be compensated for their like for all their work in open source. So yeah, I could not agree with you more on this.
I think that another strong factor about this is that um, the developers might not be earning very much or anything at all, but at the same time you have like huge corporations that their product is based on it, right? They're making millions because of the work that someone else did out of their good of their heart. Things like I don't know, like your favorite test runner or server. Like I don't know who funds Express, but without a doubt, like thousands of services and businesses are dependent on Express, and they're raking in millions. And I don't know if Express is like part of a foundation and earns money, or if people are if corporations are donating developer time to Express, but like there's some imbalance there, and it I don't know the answer, but I wish we could find a way to make this equitable and fair for people who come up with these fantastic ideas that businesses now depend on entirely.
Absolutely. And I think kind of that was also noticed in the Log4j attacks, right? Like everyone was dependent on open source technologies. And like suddenly these contributors who do have like lives outside of open source are completely pressurized to kind of fix these issues and the vulnerabilities. But yeah, I mean, I think kind of that opened my eyes as well, right? Because it is definitely a pressing issue today, right? And open source, it's an awesome actually like kind of way to build, right? Uh, but like the issue actually is obviously that people need to be compensated, and like open source is not a way to build a living, right? Like today, if you're not commercial, there's almost no way to actually build a living with open source unless you get sponsored by like a crazy number of people. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I think what like your thoughts on that are, I mean, like I completely agree with you, and I would actually like I would love to know a bit more about like kind of maybe like what you're looking forward to building in the future, maybe with open source or side projects, or like yeah, like what do you have in store for the future?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got some good ideas for Starship for building it out. That's not anything that would be like uh, that would earn me a buck though. But as you can imagine, like a lot of people love Starship, and we want to continue maintaining it. We have a lot of great ideas for like how we can make it both more extensible or expanded in the future. To name a couple, like Starship, in Starship, we take a lot of pride in how configurable it is, but there is a limit, right? We have an upper bound because our configuration is also fairly simple. We want to make it both approachable to beginners, but also rich and expressive for people who want to build like a custom prompt on top of this, on top of Starship, and that's a balance that's hard to strike. So I think the plan, what we're playing around with now, is embedding a scripting engine into Starship, so that people who really want to like deck out their Starship to work, their Starship prompt to work exactly as they want to, they'll have basically a programming language that they can use to build out their prompt. And what Starship will take care of in that case is like accessing environment values and language values, and like you can quickly find out get status and stuff. So you don't have to think about like the overhead of that, things that all prompts kind of need to deal with. And instead you could just think about the styling and like what shows up when and how it looks. So that, and the other thing is a growing burden on the Starship maintainers has been supporting all these modules. So like the Node module and the Swift module, and like we want to be able to support any language you use, but we can only spend so much time and have only so much expertise. We don't cover the entire gamut of possible languages that we support in Starship among our maintainers. So the best thing would be to kind of outsource that. So we're thinking of building like a plugin ecosystem. So kind of like Brew or Chocolatey or whatever, you can install a plugin or a module that would have support for Swift and show your Swift version number. That way someone else who's a Swift expert can maintain that code base. Where that gets a little complicated is that Rust makes dynamic importing of dependencies very difficult. It's not very easy to like just pull in a dependency on the fly while the code is running and install it. So that's a hurdle that we're kind of trying to figure out. But it'd be really cool to have, like a proper plugin ecosystem for Starship. Outside of Starship, I'm also doing some work on AniList, which is a social network for anime and manga fans. The project is growing tremendously, and we want to kind of make it able to what's the word? We have a lot of new designs and ideas for how it'll work. So I've been spending a lot of my time working on that. I don't know. That's kind of what my free time is these days, like building out new ideas for Starship and new ideas for AniList whenever I have a free moment after CodeSandbox.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, right? And I think it's pretty nice that you still can continue building an open source with Starship, and you still find the time to maintain Starship and the other libraries, right? But yeah, I mean, I think kind of that's pretty cool, right? Like I find like the scripting thing is pretty cool, right? Because you obviously are able to both support those who are new to the ecosystem and like those who are experienced and like they really want to kind of customize their prompt, right? I think the plugins is also really cool, right? Because you could have someone else maintaining the plugins, but it's a great extension to the actual shell, right? And like I feel like that's something that's really cool. And I think that's the biggest benefit of open source, right? Like you just give them a way to extend your software, and boom, like they just do it, right? People who are passionate about it they will do it, right? And that's like a great way to actually build the whole ecosystem. So I think that's really cool.
I think it's very exciting. We can spend our time working instead on like performance improvements in Starship and maybe introducing different new features as opposed to kind of maintaining these language implementations that we honestly don't know a whole lot about, right? We're making a lot of assumptions, and we'd much rather have somebody who who's like a diehard Swift fan maintain our Swift integration.
Absolutely. I think that's pretty much it. Like, I mean, if you have any questions for me about Builder Group or the whole community, I mean, please feel free to. But it's been really awesome chatting with you. Like, you're a big inspiration to almost all of us in Builder Group, and we really do appreciate your time.
Amazing, yeah. Thank you so much. It's really awesome what y'all are doing on Builder Group. I've been lurking for a bit, just like uh, seeing what y'all are chatting about and joining in on these Builder Talks. It's really exciting to see like the next generation of developers and entrepreneurs kind of get their kickstart here. Really exciting stuff. I'm looking forward to see the next, I don't know, big founders and CEOs of big tech coming out of here.
Awesome. And yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. And yeah, again, awesome chat with you. And we hope to have you, or we hope to see you active in the community.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time. If any of y'all have any questions about Starship development in Rust, whatever it may be, feel free to reach out. My Twitter is Matt Chai. My GitHub is Matt Chai. Feel free to open a discussion on the Starship GitHub page, on the Starship repo. It's called a repo. We've got our own Discord. If you've got any questions, yeah, whatever it may be, always happy to chat.
All right, awesome. So take care, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, see you around. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.